This is the Experience Share podcast.
Where I, Mark, the Joe,
And I, Rowan, the pro.
share our differing experiences in the Pokemon TCG and competitive circuit.
Whether you're playing for fun or you're trying to reach the top of the game, we hope our Experience Share helps you level up.
If no one's listening, we'd be talking about this anyway.
So if you are listening, then make sure to use what you learn to beat those that aren't.
So usually when you go on a podcast, like people talk about stuff. This is our first podcast. We were talking about how even though we play together and we have separate ways in our lives, both the ways that we're involved in the Pokemon community, we can go and hope that it'll help elevate someone's game. So that's one of the biggest reasons that we wanted to start our podcast and be able to talk. And, you know, after the holidays, New Year's resolutions, we know that a lot of people are coming into this being like, hey, you know, in this new year, second half of the season, I want to make a real run where I want to get better in Pokemon in general. So that's kind of what our podcast is looking to do and to support and to give you kind of, hey, I have a full-time job, I have other responsibilities, but I love playing Pokemon. I'm trying to get my inviter. I'm trying to find different ways to compete. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yep. And for me, you know, I'm going full-time Pokemon now. I play the game a lot. I've played for 8 years. I've got some good finishes under my belt. And I know even though I have so much knowledge, I've learned a lot from you, Mark, from your different perspectives. So I think it's really valuable for the two of us to be able to come together and bring this content to everyone.
And we want to really make sure that we're coming and bringing a different content to you. I think we would agree that there's a lot of meta manipulation out there when it comes to the content that you look at, and sometimes it's not all the content. And if you're searching for Pokemon content, either you really love Pokemon or you're trying to get better. And I mean, I think when it comes to a podcast or a learning forum, you want to be honest. I know that we might have participated in some meta manipulation pre-LAIC. There might have been a photo taken of me on Roaring Moon and him on Mew saying that he hates Mew and the deck is great. What did we play at LAIC?
I figured it out. Okay, I didn't have Crushing Hammers in my deck yet. Then I got the Crushing Hammers and it was fun.
Yeah, and once we had Crushing Hammers, you know, we did play Mew for LAIC. So just even with the meta manipulation that you put out there, you got to keep your ears to the ground because your meta manipulating might be wrong. So I hope you had a great holiday, Rowan. I know I did. I know we spent some New Year's together for Josh's birthday. To shout out to my brother for his birthday. But we also took on the break and we played a lot of Pokemon. And we played in quite a few League Cups. And Rowan, if you want to start about your League Cup experience, I know you played at the Wood for Sheep one, and that was a Tuesday Cup?
Yeah, Tuesday night cup. We started at 6 p.m. I think we ended up finishing at about 2 a.m. I played Gardevoir to the tournament. I just took Kieran Farah's exact 60 from LAIC. I've been really liking it. Super consistent deck. And throughout the tournament, the craziest part, in my opinion, was that I didn't play against a single good matchup. I played against Entei Valiant, Chanpao, Rapid Strike a few times. Actually, I played against Fusion Mew. That matchup was pretty good. And I was actually able to overcome all of these bad matchups. I lost one game in the finals, but otherwise I went undefeated. And I think that really just goes to show how resilient this Gardevoir deck is.
And what do you think, kind of, even with the bad matchups, do you think it was a skill gap in your opponents that you were able to think through the matchup, or do you think, you know, they maybe play against some worse Gardevoir players or someone that's not at your level? What do you think really helps you overcome those bad matchups?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is that a lot of players don't have experience against really strong Gardevoir players. So, you know, I'm playing against these decks that like to spread damage counters, you know, Rapid Strike, Entei Valiant, and I'm using Cresselia in a lot of spots. I'm using Countercatcher Iono to really leverage my position and make them draw poorly. You know, I'm targeting their draw engines, and a lot of people aren't ready for this kind of play. So I think I definitely get an advantage from just people not being ready for the optimal lines.
And then after that, me and Rowan both played in a cup at Game 3, local store in Oakville, Ontario. We had about 32 people. I think there was a 40 cap on that one. Rowan, how was your round one?
Oh, you know, my round one was phenomenal. I lost in 5 minutes because I was not there. I was, in fact, at home because I forgot there was a League Cup that day, which was really unfortunate.
And you know, a lot of people just probably would have slept in. Why'd you still come to the cup? Why'd you still want to play?
I knew I could still win. You know, round one loss doesn't mean I'm out of it. I believe it was a 6-round League Cup. Is that right? Or was
No,
it
we had five. We had five rounds.
So I could go show up and go 3-1-1 and still make cut. So I figured I just had to show up and go 3-0. I had a good shot.
Yeah, I also was at that cup. I did well. I made top 8 in that one. I've been playing Roaring Moon in Giratina Lost Box and Lost Tina. And the first time I played the deck had done well in Malaysia. I'm a big researcher. I'm a big researcher because if they say you steal decks from one person, it's if you steal decks from many people, then you're just researching. So you're not really net decking. And I love seeing what's happening in Asia. So shout out to Malaysia, to Aaron Minjut on Twitter. He's one of the commentators out there. He shared Aaron King's deck that won. I made some changes to it. I like off-the-wall meta decks because I feel that sometimes they'll let me have a surprise factor. When you have people like Rowan Stavenow, your League Cups, who's a world champion and a regional champion, but not an international champion yet. When you put it in those situations, sometimes you need to have that surprise factor to have a chance because usually they'll just beat you if you play the regular line. And I did lose to you in top 4 at Game Time Collectibles. Shout out to our sponsor for setting up the podcast. Use Coach Mark for 5% off. But that was the first time we played that matchup. You were on Gardevoir, and I think I played the matchup completely wrong. So going into the Game 3 Cup, I actually, at 1:30 in the morning, spent a lot of time watching the Shift Gear podcast where they had Dan Hugar on, and he talked about his experience at San Antonio with Lost Tina itself. And I think that's a real big thing, is watching podcasts. Again, if you're watching this, you're looking to learn, and learning from that to kind of help you. And when I went up against Anil, who's also very good, he's top 16 at LAIC. He brought the Iron Hands 16 Energy deck to fruition and really put that deck on the map. He was on Gardevoir because he probably realized, like you, the Gardevoir is probably the best deck in the format right now, especially with the crazy amount of Charizard from San Antonio. Yeah. And we played the deck in a really, really insane way. And I chose not to get aggressive, and it came down to him not expecting a second boss in the deck. And I know that that's something I really like in Tina. I know me and you were having discussions whether you should have the 2 counter catchers or the 2 boss, and you were definitely on the 2 counter catcher. Have you changed your mind on that at all?
I have actually changed my mind. Yeah, I was a big 2 counter catcher fan in Lost Tina. But I've changed my mind. I think having that boss at the end of the game, I was losing a lot of games because it would become this awkward stalemate at the end where you're both at 2 prizes and you need a boss, and counter catcher just didn't do it.
Yeah. I found that I was often lost zoning the second counter catcher just because the other piece was usually more important if I had the other one in my deck. And I had to play in my winning into top 8 against regional champion Raymond Long.
Yep.
He was also on Gardevoir. So when we talk about like worse Gardevoir players than Rowan, like the majority of players were playing Gardevoir at this tournament, and they were Adam Calamat, who's like our large local warrior who's been playing Gardevoir all season, Rowan, who's a regional champion playing Gardevoir, Raymond Long, regional champion playing Gardevoir, Anil, 16th at LAIC playing Gardevoir. If Kieran was there, top 4 LAIC with Gardevoir. So the Gardevoir players in the GTA are the top Gardevoir players. So you have to bring it because they will find ways to exploit you. What happened in your winning in? Because I didn't even see you say goodbye.
I got a little tilted. In my winning in, I owned my opponent to 2 cards, and he needed a 3-card combo to win. It was Mirage Gate, another energy, and a boss, maybe. I can't remember exactly, but it had to be a perfect 3-card combo, and he went draw. Oh, sorry, man, and put down all 3 cards, and I left instantly. I was tilted. Yep.
I think that was great for me because I didn't have to. My record against you in Top Cut is very low. My record to you at locals is probably 50-50, but in Top Cut, if you give you more time, you're probably going to overcome. And I think that's it for any player that has more experience. If you're put into a situation when you're up against them, the more time that you give them, the better chance that the player that has more experience or more knowledge in the matchup has to come through that match. I think it was very lucky that For our top cut, it was only 50 minutes. So playing against Raymond Long with only 50 minutes compared to the amount of time that he had in the final at the regionals. With his super rod plays, I think you want as little amount of time against someone that thinks as much as he does to hope to give you the game. So I lost you top 4. You won Wood for Sheep. And then I lost in the finals to Anil at that cup. So for the Roaring Tina deck, we were at a top 4 loss and then a finals loss. And then you didn't come out to this one, but shout out to David Adams in Buffalo. This was this previous weekend. It was a marathon. We love America. This cup was free. The cup was free. Everyone got a pack of Silver Tempest on entry. You got a prize pack on entry. And then because we started late, because of the border, thank you, Trainer Jay, for making sure I got there on time. We started late. They gave everyone an additional pack of Silver Tempest. And then during a lunch break, we all got pizza.
Oh my gosh.
But it was best of 3, 50 minutes. So it was a very long day. And then top cut was 75 minutes. And you better believe when they told me when I saw the clock at 1:15, I looked at the judges and I was like, really? And they were like, no, we want to make sure that we give people the best chance to play. They were ready to be there forever. I mean, this cup, I won the cup with Roaring Tina. Charizard is a very good matchup for the deck, and I played against 4 Charizards on the day. And earlier in Swiss, my Charizard opponents decided to go first when they won the roll. So that gave me a lot of confidence in the day after playing the matchup. And as Tina, I wanted to go second in it. But to go from 12:35 to 11:50 at night to win a cup, that was 6 rounds of Swiss. And it was 21 games total between Swiss and top cuts. So, but I really like the meta. I just want to play. I think there's a lot of people right now that are struggling with the meta. And I think you just have to play Pokemon. I don't think a meta's been like this in a while.
Yeah. So a question I have for you then is, in those 21 games of Pokemon, do you think you get an edge from having some experience in the game for playing so long over newer players? Did you feel that advantage at the League Cup?
One thing that, since I've started playing Pokemon, and I think you've seen it as well when you tried playing Magic the Gathering, is in Magic the Gathering, every single match you play, whether it's a locals, whether it's a League Cup level, whether it's a regional level, is best of 350 minutes with sideboarding.
Yep.
So you are playing, when you start off in a game like Magic or in a game like Yu-Gi-Oh, which is not best of 1 and transition to Pokemon, you have played infinitely more games than someone has if they have just played Pokemon. And I think usually I'm against best of 3 cups because I want to do something on my Saturday nights. You know, I want to go to a cup, enjoy, play some Pokemon, and then go do something at night. But I actually really enjoyed playing best of 3, and I think if we play more best of 3 cups, there'll be less people kind of sun running into the top 8. Like, you'll see a lot more of the better players make it in.
Yep.
But you also have to avoid ties. Like, you have to avoid ties. Like, there was a lot of complaints of people asking people to play faster on some slower decks, and I think if a cup is best of 3, then it's kind of the onus on you to make sure you're playing at that pace of play.
Yeah, for sure. Especially like these Gardevoir decks, these Lost Box decks, they take a long time. So yeah, in these 50 minutes. It's also nice, though, it prepares you for the regional setting to be able to play in these best of 3 cups.
I think by playing those 6, basically 9 rounds, 8 rounds with the intentional draw, I think that's really prepared me for going into Portland, which we're both going into. When we look back into San Antonio and how it influences, San Antonio was such a big tournament with a lot of people. I think I definitely got hit with fatigue. Now, usually I think it's a big strength to be able to play without fatigue in the last rounds. If you're playing at regionals, usually in the last round, say you're playing for your winning in or you're playing for your winning into points, a lot of people are really tired. Yeah. Like in Peoria, I played against a local and it was maybe his second regionals, and I could tell he was tired. Like he started the the round, and he was like, I'm so tired. In my head, I'm like, I'm getting this guy. My mindset was like, they're tired, I'm still wired, I have some energy, like I'm gonna push through. San Antonio, there were so many people, and it was different because when we were at LAIC, those rounds were really long and it was really hot, and it was probably the most physically enduring tournament that I've had to play. And I don't know what it was about in San Antonio, but it was the first time in like 5 major events during this season that I felt very tired, and I think that really affected my play. And maybe it's because Lost Tina just has way more decisions than Mew did, than Lost Box Charizard, so I think that really affected it. And I think now we're kind of at a meta where, you know, you've had a lot of successes in a lot of metas, who am I kidding? But in the Zoroark, Malamar, Buzzwole meta, I think that's where I had a lot of my success as a Pokemon player, where I really understood the meta. And I think we're kind of in the same place right now, where you have Miraidon, Gardevoir, Charizard, and Lost Box as the 4 pillars, and then you have, you know, Mew, Block-Lax, Rapid Strike as some other decks that can kind of take a win, as did like Sylveon during that format, attacking Hoopa. There's the Pidgey control deck, so there was a lot of Oranguru. So there's a lot of Oranguru in that format, but in this format, you really kind of have to know how to play against the 4. You can't beat all the 4.
No.
It's not possible to beat all the 4, especially with techs like Jirachi now. I think Jirachi just really sucks. But for you, when you go into a meta, especially looking at San Antonio, that was really Charizard heavy, what do you think about your Gardevoir choice? If I'm assuming you can tell, I mean, you're not gonna lie to viewers, but if you are playing Gardevoir for Portland, like why would you choose Gardevoir still by after playing all these events in the League Cups?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the San Antonio results, you see Charizard making up, I think it was about 25% of day 2, which is absurd in my opinion. So when you're looking at these pillars, these Charizard, Gardevoir, Miraidon especially, these decks almost form a triangle where Gardevoir beats Charizard, Charizard beats Miraidon, and Miraidon beats Gardevoir. So when I look at this meta and I see all this Charizard, I'm thinking this looks amazing for Gardevoir. I assume other people will be having the same thought, so I wouldn't be surprised to see a big spike in Gardevoir, and maybe Miraidon goes down. Now, you can think about this on several levels, right? If everyone's going to be playing Gardevoir, well, now you got to be playing Miraidon. So I'm not sure exactly how it will shift. I never am, but I do know that I'm really liking this high Charizard play as a Gardevoir enjoyer.
I think if we look, and we were talking about the kind of graph when it comes to a bell curve, where it's like hit your opponent really hard, outscale your opponent, hit your opponent really hard, and in the middle you have Lost Box decks, and on the side you have Charizard and Miraidon. I think that's an important way to kind of look at it, especially. But one thing that if you're trying to get better, and we have information for us that you don't have to collect as much as you did before, and information is power, is that with the combination of Limitless and PokeStats Live, shout out to Jared Grimes for all the hard work that he does on PokeStats Live, you really see kind of how a format evolves. So before, we would only really see the top 8 decks. We don't really have this. So LAIC, okay? Coming out from LAIC, it was Charizard was really close to winning Toronto, but it was Miraidon and Guardian in that final, right? What do we have in the final of LAIC? We have Miraidon, and then we have Iron Valiant, which wasn't seen as a deck to come. And that's the thing about internationals. Decks that come out of nowhere, especially in those smaller events, have a chance to surprise and win the tournament. Because when Zoroark Golisopod first came out, the deck that was in the finals of that tournament was Silvally GX.
Oh my gosh.
And I bet that many people will not know what Silvally GX does, but that card made a final of that tournament. Yeah. But Zoroark became the superstar, and Greninja was kind of left over as something from the previous format that could still play. So LAIC, Gardevoir was actually 18% on day 1, Charizard 16% of the field, Tina 12%, and Shen Pao was 10%. Those were the top 4 decks, okay? And we were saying that Gardevoir, Charizard, Tina, Miraidon are kind of the pillars of our format. So Shen Pao kind of goes out of the picture from there, and then the day 2 conversion for LAIC was Mew and Guardy at about 20%, and then Lugia and Tina also had very good conversions. Charizard, which was 16%, 10% of the Charizard made day 2, and Miraidon 9% made day 2, with Miraidon making the final. You don't see the stats here, but after that tournament, it was Guardy over Charizard in Brisbane, which is a much smaller tournament. And we had 2 North Americans go to that tournament, Cal and Gabe, and they both played Guardy, and they both top 8'd, I believe, right?
Both top 8. Yeah.
They both top 8'd there. And then in Gdansk, we had Snorlax over Charizard. So there's kind of a pattern. The Charizard, even though it's coming second best, I think the power level on that bell curve is just so easy for players that are coming in to kind of close that skill gap. Because before, if you can't KO their Zoroark, you know, Riotous beating Acerola, you're going back and forth. In a Guardy mirror, like, are you guys taking knockouts on turn 2?
No, almost never.
But Charizard attacking for 180 on turn 2 puts a lot of pressure on an opponent. So, and then Stugart was Sablezard over Miraidon. So Miraidon comes back. So it's almost like you have the play well deck versus the hit hard deck. So so Miraidon over Valiant. Those are both hit hard decks. Guardy over Charizard. That's the skill deck versus a hit hard deck. Snorlax over Charizard. I'm assuming Control is a skill deck. So skill deck versus hit hard deck. Sablezard over Miraidon. Skill deck versus hit hard deck. And then in San Antonio, it's Charizard versus Tina, which again is
hit hard versus skill deck. And I think something interesting is that these hit hard decks show up so frequently. And I think people really fall back on these. So even though in San Antonio, Miraidon did so poorly, I don't expect it to fall off the map. You know, I think people will stay committed to these decks. They're easy to switch between, between formats. Like we had Buzzwole. What other Max Elixir decks did we have?
Evital Garb. Even though Evital was a skill deck, you could actually close the skill gap because the Max Elixir. Oh, Volcanion EX.
Volcanion, perfect. These big basic, bunch of energy attack decks. They come in many different forms throughout all of our formats, and every time people love these decks. So no matter if I think it's good in the meta or not, these decks will continue to see play.
Xerneas Break.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yep, we had local Pokemon mom, Barb Billinger, make a GTA Cup final with Xerneas Break. And look, I think that there is a divide in the player base where some of the best players aren't willing to play those hit hard decks. I think we don't see a lot of like super Charizard going. Like Azul's group, I mean, that group, when you look at how they've done in Toronto this year, and then now San Antonio with Azul and Grant both getting top 8, like they just look, they don't care if it's a hit hard deck. They don't care if it's a skill deck. They look at where can we exploit the format and what is going to give us the best chance to win the tournament. And I think that's really important to look at. I think if they think Mew's in a really good spot, they're going to play Mew. Like, it doesn't matter. I think Mew is also a hit hard deck. But I think there is an average amount of players that, they don't care. They're going to play the most aggressive deck possible because it can kind of close the skill gap. Or they want to feel smarter about themselves and try to play like a Guardy or play a Tina, but it might not be the best choice for them. And I know that Tina's probably the most meta manipulated deck in the format. Absolutely the most meta manipulated deck. We see Tina's mid, and then we see it make a final.
Yep.
And then we see even the people that play Tina are like, I don't know why I'm playing this deck.
Yeah. I think before we move on, I just want to stick to that point about those people that think they're smart, not wanting to play these hit hard decks. This is something that I've been thinking about a lot recently too, is maybe for those people that consider themselves more of like the pro. Sometimes these hit hard decks are actually just the best deck, and you don't need to be smarter. You don't need to be playing these complex decks to win sometimes. Sometimes a Charizard is exactly what wins the tournament. So I think that's something important to think about for sure.
I think that doesn't mean you're ever going to play Miraidon though.
I mean, I probably won't ever play Miraidon, but I mean, if it's the best deck, I gotta play it.
When we look at it, we're gonna get back to that. That's the lie detector test came back and said that's a lie. But when we look about it, the Peony Miraidon deck that came top 8 at San Antonio.
Yep.
I've been playing that a lot in coaching. I've been playing that a lot in testing. I don't think that I would play it, but what I think that deck does is it really puts a lot of pressure on the skill decks. Yeah. because you basically put that. So let's say Tina as an example. They're going to Iron Hands your Comfy, or they're going to Miraidon your Giratina. So when you have a deck that most likely, and a lot of people say, oh, it's inconsistent, it can miss. Even if it does miss, if you force them to go first and you go second, when they get to attack first, they're still going to smack you for 2 prizes, and you have to be able to respond to that deck, because if it just gets going and you can't KO for, especially Iron Hands at 230 or 280, you're in a lot of trouble, and you need to make sure that you have a game plan for that deck. And there's a lot of decks that don't have a game plan. So even if against Charizard, sure, you can Charizard back their Iron Hand. So I think that matchup's a little tight. But against Gardevoir and the Comfy decks, like, that deck is really there. And I think it's the same thing as Lugia post LAIC last year when it was a Lugia format. You had so many players playing, and I don't think anyone would have really said that Lugia was a skill deck. But we had a lot of players, both, casual or trying to push into the competitive levels, and pros just playing Lugia that whole format. And when you said, hey, if Miraidon's the best deck in the format, I might not play Miraidon. When Lugia was the best deck in format, you played Lugia at LAIC, and then you went to Toronto and you played
Quad Wheezing, yeah. I think that's a perfect example of me trying to be too creative, trying to think, oh, I'm smarter than everyone else, I'm going to play this Wheezing deck. Just because I didn't want to play the same thing as everyone else. I felt, in LAIC, I think I lost five Lugia mirrors in day 2 at LAIC, and I felt like really frustrated by that. So I just refused to play Lugia, and I think that was probably an error in my logic. Yeah.
If we touch on that, and especially I think one of the big things when it comes to our podcast, if you're still paying attention, and this is how me and Rowan just talks to ourselves about Pokemon, is, okay, you're one of the best players in North America. Let's just say you're one of the top 25 in North America, right? Sure. You trust yourself that you have range. Mew, Gardevoir, Lost Box, you're there. You feel that you can play anything, but then you're losing the best deck in the format Mirror. Do you think that's, is it because the deck is just so powerful and the cards do so many things that it kind of closes your skill gap? Or do you think for LAIC that you just were not vested in that Mirror?
I don't know. I felt very prepared. It could have just been a bad swing of variance. But I did feel like I had a lack of control in that Lugia Mirror. I felt I was going second, or mostly I was going second, and I just felt like I was outpaced and I couldn't do anything. So I think that's what was happening. Okay,
and speaking of going second, the format has really evolved into a place where I believe that going second is almost optimal. When we look at the spread of decks in the format, Charizard, you want to go second. Chien-Pao is not really in the format, but Chien-Pao is wanting to go first. Entei, you're good going either way. Yeah. Mew wants to go first. Gardevoir wants to go first. But the Lost Box decks, if they can attack or they can Abyss Seeking, they want to go second. The Miraidon decks,
they want to
go second. Yeah. Snorlax style, you want to go first? You want to go second?
I think you definitely want to go second. Same idea. You got Arven. You just want to set up. The game's going to be 30 turns. So that turn 1 is important to just set up. I think go second. Yeah.
And then even like Palkia would definitely want to go first. And I know we've touched on a lot of decks there, and especially if we're coming from San Antonio into Portland, and it's trying to figure out like what in the format is real or what is not. So let's say we agree that Zard, Gardevoir, Miraidon, those are the real decks.
Yeah.
Of the Lost Box decks, they're in there. They can win the tournament. But why have you, if we look at this whole format, you've played every regional but Sacramento and San Antonio, but now you're going to all the regionals. Why have you personally strayed away, and including last year, at the tail end of that format, why have you strayed away from playing Lost Box decks?
Yeah. So the biggest reason I don't like these Lost Box decks, and I'm kind of warming up to Tina a little bit now, but I always felt so fragile. I felt like at any point in the game, my opponent could play a Marnie or now an Iono, and I could find a bad sequence of cards and suddenly go from a dominant position to just a hopelessly lost position. And I really didn't like that swing in variance from the deck. But I think sometimes the power level of the deck is so high that it's just worth it. It's still the best deck sometimes.
Do you think that Charizard will still be the top meta share going into Portland?
Oh, that's a good question, actually. Yes, actually, I do think it'll still be the top represented deck. I don't think it'll be the same. I think it was 20% day one in San Antonio. I don't think it'll be quite that high. It'll take a hit, maybe down to like 17 or so. You know, people tend to not like to play the most popular deck from the last regional. They like to try and counter it. So I think it'll be Charizard number one, probably Gardevoir at a close second, and maybe Tina at a close third.
Yeah, so that kind of moves Miraidon down that ladder, especially as we were talking about Miraidon didn't do as well as that tournament. But this is what really influences people. Like, if you think the Miraidon didn't do well last tournament and all the good players are like, hey, I'm thinking of playing Gardevoir. Well, what beats Gardevoir? Well, beats a very good Gardevoir player, like a very strong hit from Miraidon.
Turn one Iron Hands, like, it's so hard to deal with. But I have seen some talk about Deoxys V-Star. I've been playing this card a little bit, and I think it works. I think it works against Iron Hands. Yeah.
Yeah, I did see the deck list that did play it with Jake Gerhardt and Edwin Arroyo. But does that mess with your consistent? I saw that it does help your Rapid Strike matchup, and that's one of the the top 7 decks. But does that hurt your consistency in any other matchups?
Yeah, so I think the Deoxys card only really works if you're playing a Battle of VIP Pass engine. You got to get the Deoxys down turn 1 so that when you get Iron Hands, you can respond right away. And personally, I've been really liking not having Battle of VIP Pass in my deck. So I'm kind of torn right now between do I want to forego the Battle of VIP Pass Deoxys package, or do I need to do it for the Miraidon level? I'm kind of stuck on that, honestly. I don't know.
What does not having Battle VIP Pass in your deck do for you?
Yeah, so I feel like when you don't have Battle VIP Pass in your deck, your turn 3, turn 4 are so much more powerful. Once you get off that Mirage step, which in my opinion is fairly easy to do, all your cards are live. You have a bunch of fog crystals in your deck. It helps you get more energy, and it just allows you to have a very explosive comeback turn on turn 3, which is really the primary strategy of the deck, is a comeback deck, especially with Countercatcher now.
They kind of announced when we're expecting rotation. I think we all assumed that it was going to come before EUIC. Do you think that the end of Battle VIP Pass is coming early?
I don't know. I hope not, actually. I like the card. A lot of people, they give a lot of hate on Battle VIP Pass, but I like having consistent turn 1s in the format. I do.
I've also strayed from 4 Battle VIP Pass in Tina.
Yeah.
So I saw a lot in Japan that they had gone to either 3-3 Nest Ball and VIP Pass, or 4 Nest Ball, 3 VIP Pass. And then Dan had gone on the podcast on the Shift Gear to talk about why he's playing 4 Nest Balls. And I think the biggest reason that I've seen 2 play 4 Nest Balls versus VIP Passes, you're saying the dead hands later on, is if you get Iono'd, and you were just saying, when you get Iono'd as Tina, it sucks. When you get Iono, they put a lot of good cards on the bottom, and if you draw VIP Pass, you cannot get those cards to the top. So you are flower selecting for cards that you want there on the bottom of your deck, and you don't play Artisan, and you don't have ways to shuffle your deck other than Nest Balls. And just having more Nest Balls for the late game, when you're searching for a Roxanne, you're searching for a Path, you're searching for a Mirage Gate, or you're searching for a Giratina V-Star, being able to take them from the bottom and bring them into your decks to give you a better chance to draw or sequence into them, that Nest Ball is giving you that opportunity where you can't refinement a Battle VIP Pass in Tina. Sure, they're great because when you see them, they make your flower selectings really, really easy later in the game, but it's not the same that you're actually turning it into 2 extra cards in Gardevoir.
That's interesting. Before now, I do have 4 Battle VIP Pass in my Tina deck, but I am kind of rethinking that now, because you're right. That value of shuffling your deck, you're constantly selecting, putting your good cards in your hand, and then they go to the bottom. So I do definitely see that value.
Yeah, I think it's worth trying. And again, when we talk, Rowan sees the game in so many different ways because it's so good. And then it's nice, someone that's just on, that third, 4th rate duelist with a third tier deck that you can kind of bring and be like, hey, this is why I think this is worth trying on there. Looking at this format and seeing more in there, when I'm on Tina, the deck, obviously Gardevoir sucks to see. The deck I'm most afraid to see is a Mew VMAX deck.
Oh, yeah.
And it was really close. I think I tied the Tinas a lot when I was on Mew at LAIC, where I would just maybe I was being too conservative, where I would Psychic Leap to put 50 to make sure that we could eventually Power Tablet and then Genesect attack, make sure that we knock out those V-Stars later in the game. But when I'm on the Tina side of the matchup, I just feel I'm getting knocked out faster. Their deck's just drawing way more cards. They're more consistent than I am. And the judge path, like I was not expecting how much. I was like, hey, I have a Frenzied Gouging, that's 3 prizes. I have a Star Queen, that's 3 prizes. This is going to be easy. And then I lost to Mew both times that I played against it in San Antonio. And I had to put a Spiritomb in my deck because I was like, hey, I want to make this matchup closer. Where do you think Mew is really fitting in the format right now?
I mean, I think it's a great deck, as always. I think Spiritomb is really scary. If people are playing Spiritombs, I don't think the deck's very good. I mean, we saw, I think, about a 20% conversion rate in San Antonio for both Fusion Mew and DTE Mew. I don't particularly like the Fusion Mew. I think it's fairly hopeless into Charizard, which currently is not ideal, seeing the 20% Charizard meta. So I think I like the DT version. I have moved off the Crushing Hammers now because I think Roaring Moon has dropped off the face of the earth. So I just went back to something like my Peoria list with the Luxray Grabber package to shore up that Charizard matchup. But I think the deck's really well positioned.
I saw that Christian Labella did very well at a regional with the Hammers list. And I think going into Charizard, I did tie Charizard twice at LAIC. And when they don't have that many energy. So even just putting them on like 1 or 2 energy with the Hammers, like I know you're off Hammers, but I think Hammers actually really helps that matchup. And then like Path judging them. I think it's different, obviously, with Pidgeot versus some people are trying the Bibarel version. And I think any type of path against Pidgeot is very well positioned.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, similar to what you were saying with your Tina Roaring Moon deck, you know, you have an easy way to kill 2 Mews, but just the pressure of Judge Path sometimes makes it very difficult to hit those cards and knock out those Mew VMAXs.
When we look at tech cards, okay, so we kind of have a trifecta of tech cards right now that people put in their decks against different parts of the format. We have Spiritomb, we have Jirachi, and we have Manaphy. And I think most of the times you can run 1, you can run maybe 2. You're never putting all 3.
No.
3 is crazy. You're not putting in. So, you know, in Gardevoir, are you playing Manaphy and Jirachi? Like, you're not playing Spiritomb in that list.
Yep. It's hard, you know, these cards. I think to think of it in more of a broad sense with these cards is you want to play the one that provides you the most like equity overall. So say you're playing a Rapid Strike Urshifu deck, you know, your Mew matchup is horrific. It's probably, I don't know, let's say you have a 10% chance to win. Now you throw a Spiritomb in your deck and suddenly you have maybe a 70% chance to win against a DT Mew deck. You know, that's a huge spike. So I would be looking for what spikes your deck's matchup spread overall the hardest. I think like in Gardevoir, you got to be playing Manaphy, obviously. Not even like getting Greninja'd is the worst one. You can't let yourself get Greninja'd. You're a setup deck, so you need the Manaphy. But also in Mirror, getting Screamtailed is pretty annoying. So having the Manaphy for that. I could definitely see a Jirachi being played as well. I think that Tina is going to continue to be a very popular deck. I mean, it's seen about a 20% day 2 conversion rate for 3 regionals in a row or something, and now people are finally seem to be talking about it a lot. So I could definitely see myself playing a Jirachi as well. Yeah.
And then Spiritomb. Spiritomb.
Yeah, no Spiritomb. I don't know. Like, I think it, like, in my opinion, along that line of increasing your equity, I think Gardy probably has, you know, 40, 50%, maybe a bit above equity against Mew already. So why would you put a Spiritomb in your deck? You know, you probably increase from like 50 to 80% or something, but it just seems unnecessary to me in a Gardevoir deck.
So when it comes to Tina, I think Manaphy is a card that's been SQ'd kind of from the deck. Henry was kind of one of the first people to do that at NAIC. Henry Brand, he had the Cross Switcher Tina deck, and I was like, hey, what do you do against Greninja? And he's like, hey, you just bench one Comfy. You just put one Comfy and you Abyss Seeking, and if they don't get that, so that's one card like I've never really cared about. Manaphy. Sometimes I do get punished that I do put two Comfies and they have like one in the laws, and I'm like, no way they're getting 7. And then they get 7, and then, you know, I'm kind of licking my chops there. But I tried Jirachi at San Antonio, and I did play against a Sablezard, which I did win. It actually really came in handy in that matchup. And I played against a Gardevoir, and I think I let my Jirachi die too early because they're eventually forced to kind of use Screamtail to go after your Jirachi because they can't crest, right? And then they put down, if they're playing Jirachi, it makes the matchup even harder because then they put down a Jirachi and you can't take 2 on the Screamtail and on a Kirlia or a Routes. But if they don't have Jirachi, then I'm like, yes, put your Screamtail down, put as much damage on it. Let me try to take 2 prizes in that matchup. But if a Gardevoir has a Jirachi, it kind of keeps me more honest as a Tina player, and I think the Sablezard players will. However, I also have a Tomb. I had Tomb instead of Jirachi after the regional, and Tomb didn't do anything in my first tournament because everyone was playing Guardy, but in the Buffalo tournament, Tomb was actually pretty good against Mew. Even Fusion Mew, like if you just wait for the right time to play it after they discarded some Fusion energy, and then you play it, and they have the DT attacker, it can actually surprise them. Then they have to break Path and Spiritomb. But it also has a lot of implication against Charizard. Same thing that it used to have implication against Lumineon and in the Chen Pao deck. But now in Charizard, if they start slow, they're looking to draw 3 cards off that Rotom. That's been like the real breakthrough in that deck recently. And the Spiritomb just makes that a dead card that they only use for the V-Star. And then it means late game, if they don't have a Pidgeot, they're relying on Lumineon, then it makes it really hard for them to come back into the game if you have a Spiritomb. Because their ideal bench would be, you know, Charizard in the active, and then they have a Charmander, and then they have a Pidgey, and then say they have a Manaphy to protect against a Greninja, but then they'll have one V Pokemon, and then if they bench Jirachi, which they will against a Sableye deck, then if you KO a Pidgey, then they only have the 2 Charizards, right? And they're usually only setting up 2 Charizards, so when they play down all their decks, it actually throws their game plan off.
Yeah, it definitely starts to get awkward. I've also noticed this in Gardevoir when you're playing against Lost Tina is having a Manaphy and a Jirachi. It's a lot. You know, you really do limit yourself.
Yeah, because then if they kill one Kirlia and then you have to attack with a Screamtail or a Cress, then that's still one less. And if you have a Ninja, like that's one less part of your draw engine.
Yeah.
So
that's also one of the main reasons I love the no Battle VIP Pass version is because that Battle VIP Pass can rely on Celebrations Mew a lot. And so putting down that Celebrations Mew every game is really bad against Lost Tina. So I think that the Battle VIP Pass version actually does lose a lot of equity against Lost Tina.
And Charizard, also, if they trap their Mew, right? And a lot of times they're using energy to retreat that Mew, and they only play 7 energy, 1 Super Rod. You can put them in a lot of bad spots, and by having the Spiritomb against them, if you choose to put Spiritomb for your Mew matchups in any deck, and some equity and splash damage when it comes to playing against Charizard, then they're forced to go about their turns much differently. If you have a Spiritomb turn 1, they cannot Lumineon for Arven.
Yeah.
And if they don't have the Arven already in their hand, right? And Arven turn 1 is really, really important for them. So I think that brings it. And then, you know, we haven't talked about it much, but also Spiritomb is good against Snorlax.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we did see a bit of evolution. We saw Liam Halberton and Hale. I'm not sure what Hale's last name was.
Albern Knight. I don't know if I pronounced that, but yeah, Hale was there. That guy has a tremendous top 8 rate.
Yeah, I've heard that. What else was he on? I think a Gudra play, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Anyways, and they both had Pidgeot EX in their deck to help kind of counteract Spiritomb, I think, and also for some other reasons. But yeah, if you look at like Cal Connor's list, it's heavily reliant on Rotom. So if you were playing a deck that maybe has a bad control matchup, a Spiritomb would be a card that would help not only Mew, but also that control matchup.
Yeah, actually, you bring up Cal. I wanna, not really shout him out, but really kind of put him out there as someone that has major range. I mean,
Yeah.
Gardevoir top four at NAIC. He had some Lugias before that, but like especially even this format, top eighting Brisbane
Gardevoir.
with Gardevoir. And then I don't think many of the top players had going into that tournament Snorlax stall on their radar to play, and he just played Snorlax, and he had a really good run
Yeah.
in that tournament. So when you come in, and especially when it comes to these differing sizes of regionals, now that we're going through them and seeing the differences in smaller regionals, or like Knoxville's going to be very small, Charlotte's going to be very big, Portland's going to be a little bit smaller, Toronto was pretty big, the ICs are a little smaller. When it comes to selecting decks for someone that's a pro, and Cal would be a pro, you're a pro, the Azul group. How do you go about, instead of just looking at the spreadsheet and being like, hey, this has the best matchups across the board, when you decide whether I'm going to play a consistent deck or I'm going to win a deck that might win the tournament, what are you deciding on? How do you pick those?
I'm definitely a little less risk adverse in smaller tournaments, in these large tournaments where you're playing through 15 rounds for sure. And all the top players are going to be there. I'm really looking to limit my variance. So at these tournaments, I'm probably playing Gardevoir or Mew, or some other deck, and whatever deck at the time is I consider to be the most consistent. Whereas at these smaller tournaments, I am less risk adverse. So, I could fire something off like a Lost Tina or a Blocklax or a Rapid Strike Urshifu, something like that. I would be more willing to take risks at these smaller tournaments.
Yeah, so if the field size is smaller, then it's easier to try to run the tournament with a off meta pick,
Yeah.
to try to be able to pick on the people that are just playing like the number one deck, versus a tournament like Charlotte that's going to have 2,500 people in the Masters division alone. Then you pick a deck that has probably a better 50-50 matchup range against other decks.
Yeah, especially because at those bigger tournaments, the sample size is so large that it's really hard to predict what your matchups will actually be, and you'll probably play against a larger range of matchups. So, yeah, I'd be looking to play those more consistent decks.
Now, as a Joe, and the whole I was trying to explain, for if there's any Poke dads or Poke adults watching, there used to be a TV show on an old network called Spike TV, where they would have pros from retired athletes or current athletes go up against everyday people in sporting techniques to see if they could beat the pros, and more often than not, the pros would win. The Joes would never win. But in Pokemon, I think that is one of the things that I absolutely love about Pokemon, that if you love competition, you can go up against a Torrid, you can go up against a Rowan, you can go up against a Azul. These are all amazing. You can go up against a Cyrus. I mean, at the Buffalo Cup, people are going up against Cyrus, and they were so excited to beat Cyrus, and not just for the fact that, hey, I beat this and there's some BM, but just kind of the accomplishment of beating someone that you see on stream. You really can't do that in a lot of sports. Like me and Rowan can't pick up golf and hope to beat a Tiger Woods, or we can't pick up a tennis racket and hope to be able to beat someone in that. But in Pokemon, if you do put in the work, if you do learn, sometimes you can beat someone based on skill, or you can get lucky against someone. And as a Joe, someone that I'm not, I do think about Pokemon a lot, but not at the point that someone like Rowan is, who gets to play a lot more Pokemon than me, or just has that experience of having played juniors, seniors, and now masters. When I look at a deck, I really agree with what Cyrus put out on Twitter recently, where it's, hey, you want to like stick to a deck even if the meta isn't good for it, if you just play that deck for that amount of time. And mentally this can be hard. Like when you're missing day twos or you're missing points, and the invite is such a big deal when it comes to Pokemon. It seems like the be all and end all. And as someone that's missed their invite with 30 CP, and there was a lot of blame that I could have put, but at the end of the day, the blame is on myself. This year, I'm at the point that I'm like, hey, if I miss my invite, I'm going to be okay. It's more of, can I get better every tournament? Am I getting better in this season? Because when the pandemic hit, I was like, hey, like I'm not having as much fun in Pokemon. I'm going to put my time in coaching, and because I get a lot of joy in helping younger players get better. But for me personally, that drive, that passion wasn't there. And this year I feel really impassioned, is that you have to play decks that you're comfortable with, or you have to play decks that are going to slow the skill gap. And I think that, even though people are going to judge you for playing Miraidon, like, who cares? Like, no one else cares about how you do a Pokemon than you, right? Like, no one really, it doesn't matter. Like, at the end of the day, it is very competitive, but it is also very personal. And the only person that it should matter whether you're doing well or not is to yourself. And, like, you shouldn't think, like, I'm not comparing myself to this guy, even though I lose him. And he can tell you, like, we play top fours. We'll go out for dinner after, and I'm still scratching my head. Hey, how could I have beaten this guy? Like, what could I have done? Because I just want to beat him. I want to beat everyone. Like, anyone that sits across, and I think you're the same on a level there. That anyone that sits across you from Pokemon, like, your joy is enjoyment of playing the game and just trying to beat that person, right?
Yeah, I love to compete, I love winning, but sometimes I also love losing. People put up a great game. One game that really stood out to me is Toronto Regionals, round 9. I play against Sawyer Melbourne, and I actually lost because he outplayed me. He made a great play with his Lost Box deck. He had it mastered, obviously, and I just kind of shook my head and went, wow, he beat me, and that was a real highlight for me, actually. I love to compete. I just love to compete.
Yeah, and I think, everyone puts, look, you didn't do that as great as you would have wanted at LAIC. And I know, hey, when someone is your friend and whatnot, and they didn't have great tournaments, sometimes you just have to let them stew, like, you have 24 hours to stew in how you're feeling after a tournament, and then you have to move on, because there's always another tournament. And that's one thing that's hard for people to believe, is like, it's so simple, but there's going to be a league. Then there's going to be another league. And then there's going to be a league challenge, and there's going to be a league cup, and then there's going to be another regional, and there's going to be another world championship next year. And Pokemon isn't really just defined. Sure, if you give yourself one season, winner take all, yeah, okay, that's my one season. But Pokemon shouldn't be defined over one tournament, because if we just defined always by the one tournament we play, we're going to be upset a lot more. And if you're playing Pokemon, there's probably a reason that you're playing Pokemon to forget about other things, because like Pokemon at the end of the day should be fun. If you're miserable playing Pokemon, like, and I've been there, I've been there, and it's not, and you're just kind of going through the motions. But this should be something that you're doing to enjoy. So if I've been playing the crap out of Miraidon, then I will play Miraidon to a tournament. It's the same thing with this being the exact same format: San Antonio, Charlotte, Knoxville, and then Vancouver. And obviously some things will change. Vancouver, there's a 7-week layoff. I'm like, I might just play the same deck for all 4 tournaments. I'm absolutely, when I lost in San Antonio, and it was my worst tournament of the year so far. We're hoping it's the worst tournament of the year and everything goes up, but you can't control that. I was messaging every round and being like, hey, I lost because I did this. I lost because I did this. I lost because I did this. And then ever since San Antonio, I've continued to win with the deck, and I'm going to play the deck for Portland. And I'm hoping, what I've learned in between those tournaments. I wasn't even upset that my tournament went so poorly in San Antonio, because I turned San Antonio from being, hey, I need to do well in this tournament, to, hey, I'm taking this as a tournament to learn against competition.
Yeah, and that learning piece is so huge for anyone out there trying to improve. I had this too when I went from a junior to a senior. I had a couple of years where I just lost. I lost because these seniors, they were better than me. And I think being able to take those losses and learn from them, that's really how you can level up.
And, speaking on that, like, you lost and you're a world champion like that. Yeah. There's only I think there's only 9 world champions crowned a year.
With Pokemon Go now, I think,
or VGC, Pokemon Go, like Unite. But let's just say, like, if we just say the card game, there's 3 Pokemon world champions every single year, and that is a very small group of people. And if you're a millennial, maybe if you're Gen Z, you know what kind of the Hunger Games is. There's only one champion at the end of every Hunger Games. There's one world champion at the end, and there's a lot put on just going to Worlds and trying to go. And when you went from junior to senior, like, correct me if you think kind of the same way you think. When I coach seniors, there is a group of seniors in North America. There's probably about 15 of them. And of those 15 seniors, 6 of them will basically top 8 every single. That pool of seniors will account for 6 out of the top 8 spots at every regional. So then from the remaining of those 15, they're fighting for the last 2 spots, and all the other competitors are basically fighting for those last 2 spots in top 8.
Yeah, exactly. Like the wild card spots. Yep, totally.
And what do you think kind of separates that group of 15? Usually it's age. So usually on that top 15 spot, and that's what I try to tell parents, when their kids go from junior to seniors, because juniors, if you're a really good junior, and this is no offense to the other juniors, and don't cancel us on our first podcast here, but I always say, hey, if your junior is really good and you push them and they understand the fundamentals and they understand the matchups, they can win with a ham sandwich. And this is actually, it's a term for Magic where they're like, oh, this player can win this tournament with a ham sandwich. And it's a term of endearment, and it's not based on their format. But there is a huge step when you go from being a top junior to going into seniors. And I love Formula One, so I take it akin to when you're going from like a Formula 3 to a Formula 2, and all the things have changed, and you're going up against real competitors and these people that have been in this series longer than you. Yeah. What do you think gives those top seniors the advantage, and how do you think that the seniors that are fighting for those wild cards try to get into that pool of 15 or 20 seniors?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest difference, there's 2 differences, in my opinion. There's experience, which plays a huge role, especially experience as you're young. I think as you're learning how to think, you gain a large advantage from as you're developing with this Pokemon mindset of learning how to think about all these lines. I think that's a huge advantage. And then sometimes just straight up age. I mean, I know when I was 16, I was just smarter. I knew more. I was more logical than when I was 12. So that's definitely part of it. And then for that piece of when you are trying to vie for those wild card spots, I would be targeting those top players. I would be thinking, oh, who are those 15? What are they going to play? How do I beat that? And maybe how do I beat that with a punch hard deck? Maybe they love Gardevoir, so I'm going to show up with a Miraidon deck, or maybe they love Charizard, so I'm going to show up with an Urshifu deck or a control deck. I think that's really what I would be looking to do. But speaking of this junior senior dynamic, what would you think of the meta? How do you think it will shift for them?
So I think their meta is a lot similar. It's more similar to us than we think. And as someone that coaches a lot of juniors and looking at top 8s from it's very similar, but there are more attacking decks that do well. So you will see like Charizard very early on, even in Peoria. Charizard started creepy Pittsburgh, Peoria. Charizard was creeping in. Lugia would always do well. It's very easy to teach someone about having to summoning star very early, and then you have to teach them kind of how to do your prize trade. But it's also a format where off-meta decks can win a lot more, because the top juniors, they will know how to play against the format. So you have to try to surprise them sometimes with a deck they won't be prepared at, because as a coach, Rowan, you're preparing your junior for how to play against the top decks, right? And for me, it's something I do with my kids. I always ask, hey, should I play like a junior or should I play like as a player? They always tell me to play like as a player. And then you attach, you're playing against a stall deck and you attach a water energy to a Cramorant, and they're like, what?
Yeah.
Right? But it's small things like that to kind of prepare them. Usually you want to prepare them on a very consistent deck. Maybe I missed a bit as a coach last year that I really didn't want my kids to play a ton of Lost Box during that format, because I was like, there's a lot in their control that can go wrong. But then I was okay with them playing like Mewtwo v Union Control, right? Because sometimes as a junior, you go up against a kid and nothing's happening, and a kid will they won't want to play the game, right? But in seniors, especially when you were a top senior, and you had 2 years of being a top senior, and the senior classes you went up against were pretty tough. Yeah. How did you, and I remember you had the Trinity at the time, which was you, Lucas, and Isaiah, and all of you have gone into Masters and have done very well, and even Isaiah, when you look at what he puts on Twitter and stuff, I mean, I also agree that maybe one Sableye is what you have in Tina, and he was very much on the boss one catcher, and you guys all have different minds and different ways to approach decks. How did you attack the senior meta? Because we see it right now that there's a group with like Owen Dalgard. He's very, very vocal when it comes to social medias and decks, but he's not playing the same deck to every tournament.
No,
he's actively metagaming. How did you come up with that?
I think the situation in seniors has changed a little bit. When I played, I had the mindset that I was a stronger player than almost everyone in the division. And so what I did is I actually just played that top meta deck to every tournament. So for this next tournament, I would literally just be playing Charizard straight up, because I found that I was overcomplicating it too much. I was trying to counter the meta. I was trying to make up these wacky decks, and I was just kind of wasting my time. And then these top decks are top decks for a reason. And when your opponent doesn't know what's going on, maybe you have an edge over them skill wise. That's what I would really be doing in the senior division. But also I know that seniors are way more willing to play control decks. So maybe Charizard would not be the move for this one specifically. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I think they do. I know a lot. There's a lot of kids I've coached. I'm like, please don't play control. Yeah, because there's a lot of equalization there. But I think you do want to feel that you're smart. You do want to feel like you attack the meta. And I think if you're a senior and you're looking to go in to this coming tournament, and you are one of those wild cards, you're trying to get one of those spots, you're trying to top 16, especially now that we're getting top 16 points for seniors. Yeah. I think you should play a deck that does the same thing every single game and does it well. And that your whole goal is for your deck to do what it's supposed to do. So the people that Rowan has brought up, like the same thing, that are overcomplicating things or trying to attack the meta in a different way, that if they mess up, that you can capitalize on that, right? And everyone has a plan. Everyone has a plan until they get turn one amped you very much.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I think in seniors especially, another thing that I tend to see is senior decks have too many techs in them. People refuse to give up some matchups, and you'll see a Gardevoir list with a Tomb, a Jirachi, and a Manaphy, and it's so much going on, and you can really capitalize by just, like you said, amp you very much on turn one, and they've got 3 or 4 cards in their deck that just don't do anything against your Iron Hands. So maybe that is the move.
And one thing to think about, and just as us talking here, is like, hey, turn one amp you very much. If you're playing Charizard, okay, you're playing against Charizard, sure, you're going to turn one amp you very much. Charizard's going to respond with a turn 2 KO unless you have a Bravery Charm on your hands. So what is your game plan after, right? Like, this is something you should be doing on your testing. And if you are getting coaching, and I know we've talked about this a lot of coaching is very directive, and a lot of people want to know, how do I play this matchup? What is, how do I go 2-2-2, 3-2-1, 1-2-3? But I think as you're young, you should be thinking about it more on how does your coach help you figure out the way that they think and how they approach the matchup, and how that your deck works. Because let me tell you, I got this guy to spend 3 hours trying to teach me Gardevoir, and the more I played that deck, the more I was like, okay, this is too much. And I was like, I'm gonna keep playing Charizard at that point, because it kind of goes. And we're seeing nowadays more cards that equalize the skill gap. So Summoning Star, being able to set up and have your whole setup off one card, we really didn't have that in the day, because you would have to evolve. Well, you even before me, but like my real first format was that Sun and Moon on format, and that was evolving all your Zoroarks. But like, you don't evolve all 4 in one turn, right? Like you have to build up, and what if they knock out one of them, and how do you respond? But now we have cards like Pidgeot. We have cards, Countercatcher's back. Countercatcher wasn't this good back in the day.
Yeah, no, it wasn't.
Right?
There's so many strategies now that actually like to fall behind. Charizard and Guardy both have powerful comeback mechanics in them.
Yep. Okay, so I think this has been pretty good for us. Now going into Portland, let's not meta manipulate. I think we've really talked about all the decks, but let's just run through before I'm the Joe. I'm gonna ask you the pro. And you just tell me if it's a real deck or not, okay? Okay, so obviously Charizard.
That's a real deck, of course.
Okay, Baxcalibur.
That's not a real deck.
Okay, there was one in day 2 of the last tournament.
Yeah, one in like 200 people.
Okay. Entei, Iron Valiant variants. You know, there's Vaporeon, there's Urshifu, there's Entei. There's a lot of. I mean, if Gardevoir, Gardevoir was the number one played deck at LAIC, and Entei Iron Valiant made the final. And what do you think that preyed on?
Okay, it's a real deck, but only if you've been playing it though for a while. You have to have practice.
Okay, Fusion Mew.
Not a real deck. Play DT Mew.
Okay, Gardevoir.
A real deck, of course.
Okay, Tina. Is it mid?
No, Tina is not mid. Tina is very good. Just use Abyss Seeking, and the deck is real.
Okay, Rapid Strike.
Very real. Dominates Charizard.
Okay, this is on the list. I've actually never played against it, but Jesper lost. Jesper lost his winning into the mirror on Cloth Electrode.
You know, I've seen some tier lists online where the bottom tier, instead of calling it D tier, they call it Cloth tier.
Was okay? Okay, I get what you're putting down. Mm-hmm. I get what you're putting down. Sablezard.
Real deck. I haven't looked at it very much, but I think real deck. Yeah.
So it did win a cup in New York, in Rochester, and then the same player I did play against in top 4 at Buffalo. Yeah. And the deck is, I mean, the turbo deck is now this deck. Mm-hmm. And there's also Lost Box like Tord variants that play Palkia and Tina and Moon, and I'm assuming that not a lot of people are testing against that. And there's also the super effective Glasses version, and those decks I know a lot of people aren't testing, but they're making top 4s and top 8s at regionals. Like, what are you thinking on that?
You know, I think if you're a Comfy enjoyer, if you've been playing these Lost Box decks, if you're playing like Turbo Lost in the last format, I would definitely be saying you should look at all these decks. If you have not been a Comfy enjoyer previously, I think if you're hopping on, I think you should just get on the Lost Tina train. I think it's the strongest one overall. That's what I think.
Okay, Peony Miraidon.
Oh, very real deck. Very scary deck.
Okay. Classic Miraidon with Path and Flaffy and Judge.
Also a real deck, but I would just similar to how Fusion Mew, you should just be playing DT Mew. I think you should just be playing Peony Miraidon. I think it's better.
Palkia Ice Rider.
Not a real deck.
Okay. We were talking about this earlier. It was number 1 in Swiss in San Antonio. Yep. And also Luke Kirkham, made it. I think he lost in top 8 at Stuttgart or Gdansk, one of those. Came through. There's a lot of Palkia enjoyers in the GTA. Why do you consider this one not real?
I think, on the train again of these punch hard decks, I think it's a punch hard deck. I think punch hard decks can always do well. I just think Miraidon's a better punch hard deck. I don't think Palkia is really beating Charizard very often. So I would kind of just lean into that, lose to Charizard even more, and just make the rest of your matchup spread better. That's what I think.
I also think it really struggles against Gardevoir. I think Gardevoir, it's like the worst matchup. Roaring Moon.
Not a real deck. I thought this deck was going to be way better than it was. It fell off.
Okay. And then Snorlax.
Very real. You should not go into this tournament without a plan for Snorlax stall. Very real deck.
Okay. So in us not meta manipulating, what would you not be playing in Portland?
Okay, aside from all the decks that I said were not real, I would not be playing Miraidon. I can't get behind it. I don't know. It's too much of a punch hard deck, and it can't beat Charizard. I think that's the big thing. I saw a Twitter post. A lot of people probably saw it. It had a good engagement of a Tapu Koko EX that can actually paralyze the Charizard. So I think maybe if you explore that idea and you find that you can beat Charizard with this Tapu Koko EX card, you could get behind a Miraidon Peony build. I think it could be good. Personally, I'm not going to play it. What about you?
So I think just to play devil's advocate and have you in your head, against a Charizard matchup, I think you should always have a plan. So technically, you would want to use your boy, the Iron Hands, and take your first 2 prizes. Charizard's going to knock you out. Okay, this is on the going second. Then you gotta get really lucky. It's much harder, and then you want to try to find a Raichu KO on that Charizard, or a Miraidon boss KO on a Pidgeot. That's 2 prizes. Okay. Then what you have to do is you have to set up 2 Mew EXs. Okay. You have to attach 1 energy to 1, and then you use Flaffy to attach to the other one. And then if they KO your Miraidon, which they will with the Charizard, and then they can't go after both Mew EXs, then you can Raihan manually attach the Mew EX and then beat the Charizard deck. So, you're like, oh, I don't know if this can beat the Charizard deck, but I think you can't, I like it compared to the Miraidon, classic Miraidon, really popularized by the Full Grip guys, the Tricky Gym guys. Yep. They had a lot of success with that. That was the classic Miraidon deck. This one does hit harder now, but I feel that the classic Miraidon would have a harder time versus the Charizard, and I think Mew EX is actually such a good attacker against Lost Tina and against Charizard, and people are forgetting that Mew can attack in that deck now. I'm sure you can't use Generator on it, but if you think ahead enough, you can probably find a game plan, and it is such a big threat. And there's a lot of people that looked at that deck and didn't know how it worked and why there were 2 Mew EXs, but being able to Peony and then draw more cards to go through and you Iono protect yourself, I think that there is a lot more play to that deck, and there's a lot more exploration, and I think that deck can just get even better. And I think what that deck is missing is Energy Sticker.
An Energy Sticker? What does that do?
You flip a coin.
Oh, it's about to be so bad. This card is going to be terrible.
Yeah, Rowan doesn't watch any streams, but you flip a coin, and if you hit heads, you attach an energy from your discard to one of your Pokemon. Basic.
So like Dark Patch, but now you have to flip a coin.
Yeah, but Lightning. Oh, also, you can attach DTE to your Mew. So if you didn't have to use DTE on your Iron Hands, you can attach DTE to your Mew to Burning Darkness.
So are we playing 4 generators and 4 energy stickers in our deck?
I think Azul only played 2.
2 energy stickers.
Yeah, he only played it for like 2 matches, and then he stopped playing it and he switched to something else. But
okay.
I think he thinks it's good. And watch. And then for me, as a Joe, he said as a pro, he basically would not play Miraidon. As a Joe, I've put so much time into trying to play Gardevoir. I've played against so much Gardevoir. I've played against very good players playing Gardevoir. I've played versus, our average players playing Gardevoir. And I think there is such a disservice, and this is why I chose not to play Gardevoir, is if I can spend so much time learning Gardevoir, and then I sit across from someone like Rowan Stavenow, or Gabe Smart, or Cal Connor, or Zach Lesage, or Azul, and they're choosing to play Gardevoir from that tournament, and they have way more time to play Pokemon than I do, and it's a mirror. The amount of energy, and I teach this to the people I coach, is your brain is like a car's gas tank. Okay, when you play in a tournament, if you're trying to win the tournament or make day 2 of the tournament, it's a gas tank. You only have so much fuel, and if I have to play someone that's so much better than me on the experience level, and I have to think so much harder to try to win that one match with Gardevoir, and I said this to Henry too because he's also like a big Gardevoir stan. It's almost not worth it for the average player to do that, because then you're basically turning one of your matches and you're turning the mirror into an auto loss.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? Especially with Mirage Step. When, sure, maybe in the past you could have gone aggressive, Gardevoir EX, but now with Mirage Step and the game's going longer, and I told you I was pretty upset with the 75-minute Top Cut games, but like 75-minute Top Cut games at a cup, the experienced player actually has an advantage because you have more time to kind of figure out the best play. Mm-hmm. So if I was a player that's looking to go into this regional and is not one of the top players on that pantheon, I would Charizard obviously is very good to play. Mew is very good to play. Mm-hmm. I would stay away from Tina because the Charizard mirror against a pro, you can beat the pro in the Charizard mirror, yep. Especially if like for some reason they're forced to go in the odds. But against a pro on the Gardevoir mirror, it's going to be very tough on you. So,
especially, and the other thing to think about if you are a Joe and you're trying to play Gardevoir is time. Like, you got to know not only what to do, but you got to know how to do it quickly. You can't really improvise when you have that 30-minute or 50-minute best of 3 restriction on you. Yeah.
Or also dexterity, yeah, right? Dexterity. I don't think a lot of people talk about this too, but like there's also a lot of dexterity of that deck. You're drawing many cards, And that's the same thing too. Is like there's a lot of people that have been playing Lost Box for a long time. I would say 7 out of 10 flower selectings should be instant.
Yeah.
Should be instant. And there's a lot of people that do take a lot of time in their flower selectings. I sometimes will be like, hey, this one's a thinker. Like this one I actually, and that's closer in the late game. But really, 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 you need to, like, especially in this format, be able to play faster and avoid ties. Because there are a lot of decks that tie. And I think that's also a benefit of the Peony Miraidon deck. You're going to have a lot less ties.
You'll be done quick either way. That's true. Yeah.
And so with being done quick, we're done now. It wasn't as quick, but we hope that you've learned a lot. We hope that we've shared some of our experiences with you.
Yeah, and we'll see you guys next week for the Experience Share podcast.
Have a great tournament in Portland, or if you're going to any cups.